I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off-road. The guy managed the group. He was like, what are you doing in this beautiful car? I'm like, I'm going off-road. He's like, are you sure? Because you can use one of ours. And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability, as well as its robust interior, are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the 2-door Defender 90, the 4-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
So for instance, I might ask you right now a question I thought that I would like to know is, what is the most James Altucher thing about James Altucher? And what I really mean is, if one wanted to emulate you, like, what is one essential thing, whether it's a mindset, a habit, a relationship, whatever, that you cannot be James Altucher without being?
My thing is, do one thing each day that seems slightly scary, and even if it's very tiny, try hard to think of something that nobody else has done.
Can I just say, that was a very good answer for that was very generalizable. So are you encouraging people to do more frequent and short and probably unsuccessful outcome experiments? Okay.
You don't have to have a goal either. It's interesting to do interesting things. The interesting thing is to do things and not to think about things. All right, now I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
All right, well, thanks for coming to the Question of the Day reunion. So, Question of the Day was a podcast we did for, how many episodes did we do?
Well, we did it for almost exactly 1 year. And in the beginning, I think it ended up being roughly 3 episodes a week.
Yeah, we did 5 in 1 week sometimes.
Maybe a little bit. Maybe when we started, I don't know, but it got to be 3, so roughly 156 if it was, 3 a week for a year.
Yeah.
But just so you know, I assume most of you will raise your hand if you heard Question of the Day. I assume, okay, so some not. Okay, so that was this podcast that James and I did that was literally a question a day. That was mostly, I don't know what it was. It was fun though. But we batch recorded them for anyone who listened to them. So if you would listen to like one on Monday, one on Friday, one on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, then the next week, like those 6 would have been recorded in the same day because we're lazy. So we would get together for one marathon day of
the most we did was
and
like
backgammon. And
12 in a day?
I think we did, yeah. So it felt good. It felt like a farmer that was putting in the whole crop for the year if you would get 12 done in one day, because it was like that was literally a month's worth.
It was hard work. Like I would feel worn out after, because like you have to think. Like you would ask a question or I would ask a question, then you have to like think of something to say.
Speaking of getting worn out with sitting and doing next to nothing, have you all read that piece in ESPN or SI? About the
ESPN.
And you would know this.
ESPN, I know what piece you're talking about.
The calories burned by chess grandmasters?
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. So it's just from mental
Well, the brain,
exertion and stress, and the brain really.
the brain does consume 25% of your calories each day, right? So they're using their stress, they're anxious, and to be fair, during a tournament, they're not sleeping as much.
True, or eating a lot.
And they're eating junk food.
But to that end, to that point, then
They're working
smart
out.
people should be skinnier on average.
I don't know. Maybe that
Wouldn't
is-
that make sense?
Maybe we're going to get to that, and then maybe I'll ask you that question. But
The calorie loss was nutso. It was like Michael Phelps level calorie loss from playing chess.
yeah, 6,000 calories a day. They would say.
I mean,
they said in
I
the
want to
article.
take up chess just so I can eat a lot more cheeseburgers if that's the way it is. That's unbelievable.
Trust me, if you go to a chess tournament, there are plenty of obese people that they're playing chess.
All right, that would
That's
be
just
me.
at like the top level, it seems.
That would be me, except I can't play chess. Okay, anyway.
The other thing about question of the day I just want to mention is that we did so many episodes that I would forget. There was one point I would ask you a question, and Nathan, the producer, would say, you already asked that in episode 27. Then I would ask another question, and you already asked that episode 39. Another question, you already asked that.
I think that's why we
episode-
stopped.
Yeah, because I went 10 questions in a row without coming up with an original question, and I couldn't even remember the other times I asked that or what your answer was. So it was becoming kind of useless to me.
Do those of you who were listeners of Question of the Day, are you insulted by that fact that James couldn't even remember the questions that he'd asked?
I think it's because once I hit a certain age, I just
Puberty.
forgot.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah, a lot happens then. Yeah.
So
Does anyone, well, either you have kids or you were a kid, but this book that my kids had when they first got to a certain grade in school where they got sex ed, the book was called What's Going On Down There? Did anyone ever see that book? It was amazing. It was the best book title ever. What's going on down
was it
there?
what is it? One of those you could smell books? Is it scratch and smell?
Pretty sure not. Yeah. It was
So-
also not a choose your adventure book. But
Now, of course, in 2019, it would be a choose your
It would
own
be.
adventure book.
It would be.
So,
have we begun?
no. Well, yes, the podcast part has begun, but who did we decide who's going to ask a question first?
We did not.
I kind of even forgot the format.
I think it would begin. We'd literally sit down. Nathan would count us down. And then I'd say something like, hey, James. Then you would answer or not.
I forget. What I would say, hey, Steven.
Say like, right?
Would I
something
spell
like
out your
that.
name? Would I
Or
say your whole
hello? Hello, maybe. Want to try it again?
All right, try. Go.
Hey, James.
Hey, Steven.
Yeah, that was good. And then I'd say, James, I have a question for you. So truth be told, this began because I was obsessed with Quora. Do people know Quora? Yes, some? Yep. And I didn't know, and then I found out that you also were obsessed with it. And what I love about Quora is it is full of normal and abnormal people asking questions, many of which are banal, but some of which I think are amazing. And they're the kind of questions that you don't see in media. You don't really see, I feel like, in fiction so much. It was like people truly, truly asking the things that they most wanted to know about, whether it was about personal health and nutrition, or, you know, a very common question is, tell me about a famous person who was really nice, or tell me about a famous person who was really mean, or tell me about like an experience that really scarred you. So there are like these kind of generic ones, but there are so many amazing questions, and I thought like the stuff that I do with Freakonomics, we put so much research into one given episode that it's usually a big kind of serious-ish question, or not serious, but you know, something that you're going to spend a lot of time with. But these were just like everyday questions that I loved, and I thought we should do something. And as it turns out, James loved them too. So we started by stealing questions from Quora, or borrowing.
And we did call Quora and see if they could partner with us on this. And they were like, blah, blah, blah. They said something that was neither a yes or no.
I think they made the right
And we just
choice.
moved forward
Yeah.
and just stole questions from them.
Yeah.
And even read off answers.
Yep. Although I shouldn't say stole, because we did acknowledge and we even named the people and so on. But then we started coming up with our own questions for each other because, you know, we've been friends for a long time and know each other medium well. So for instance, I might ask you right now a question I thought that I would like to know is, what is the most James Altucher thing about James Altucher? And what I really mean is, if one wanted to emulate you, like, what is one essential thing, whether it's a mindset, a habit, a relationship, whatever, that you cannot be that you cannot be James Altucher without being?
I don't really know how to answer that because I think acknowledging mistakes, making lots of mistakes, being willing to make lots of mistakes, and then being transparent about acknowledging them. I mean, this is related. We talked about this a lot during many of the episodes of Question of the Day, like how to learn something, how to get better at something, how to, whether, not necessarily life hacks, but how to improve at whatever it is you love. Like you loved golf, half the episodes would be about golf when it was your turn to talk. And I loved the things I loved. And we were always trying to get better at all these different things. And we were trying to figure out, and we would talk about the 10,000 hour rule a lot. So the idea that you need to put in a certain amount of work in order to achieve at the top layers of success of something. So I'm always very interested in achieving at the top layers of success, but you make a lot of mistakes along the way. Part of getting successful is doing things that nobody else has done. Because then that's how you stand out, that's how you get noticed, else you're kind of buried with the crowd. You won't learn a lot, you won't achieve success, you won't experiment. And so I think now, since then, I've realized probably what I did more often than even I should have was what I call the 10,000 experiment rule, which is rather than devoting 10,000 hours of deliberate practice to something, you experiment over and over at things you have no idea how they will work out. And 95% of the time, you're going to screw up or bad things will happen, but you'll learn enough from the experience that as long as you don't stake everything on one experiment, then you can keep on making experiments and keep on getting better. And I think that if I look back, probably I staked too much on experiments, and now probably I stake less. But I think one common thing is that I probably experimented a lot at everything I wanted to do or get better at.
Give a for instance of one or two things that you tried and were bad at and didn't really go anywhere.
All right, so I could go to any year. So like 1996, I wanted to do a TV show, or 1995 even, and I was good at building websites, and very few people in New York City at that time knew how to do it. So Comedy Central, which HBO owned half of, I worked for HBO. Comedy Central asked me to do their intranet, and they said they would pay me on the side. And I said, I don't want to get paid. I said, I want the 3 a.m. time slot on Comedy Central, because right now all you have is infomercials, and if I do this intranet for you, it's going to be much more valuable than the 3 a.m. time slot is for you. And so to their credit, the head of the IT department there went up to the CEO, who was Doug Herzog at the time, later with the CEO of MTV, and she came back with his answer. She said, no. And I said, well, I'm not going to do the intranet. But then I had this idea. I still wanted to do a TV show, so I had this idea. I went to Jeff Bugis, the CEO of HBO, later the CEO of Time Warner, and everybody kept telling me, you can't just go see him. He was my boss's boss at the time. I think there was one more boss in there. But I just went to his office and I said, just like HBO is good at original programming, how about you do web programming? Because the only thing I was in charge of was their website. I couldn't say I want to do a TV show, but that was my real secret goal. And so he said, whatever you want to do, I don't care. I don't give a shit about the internet. And so I did this web show for HBO called 3 a.m., where I'd walk around New York City at 3 a.m, interviewing people every Tuesday. And I did this for like 3 or 4 years for them. And I interviewed basically hundreds, maybe thousands of prostitutes, dominatrices, pimps.
Are you exaggerating a little bit? You interviewed thousands of prostitutes and...
Yeah, because every night I'd interview 20 and I'd select the best 4 of that week, or every Tuesday, once a week, I would interview at least 20. That was my minimum. And then I would take the best 4. And
what night of the week did you find the best talking?
Either Tuesday or Wednesday night. So Saturday night, anybody could be out at 3 a.m. You could be out at 3 a.m. You could be out at 3 a.m. Tuesday night, if Steve Cohen is out at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday night, something bad is going down. And so Tuesday night, that was the time you wanted to go, because why everybody else goes to work the next day or goes to school the next day. If you were out think of the last time you were out at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday night, something bad was probably happening. And so it was interesting. So I would do all these crazy things. Like I went out to Rikers Island on the bus that goes there's a bus 24 hours a day that goes from one stop in Queens to Rikers Island and back, because as soon as you're bailed out of Rikers Island, they have to release you. And I spent weeks just hanging around that bus stop, and then going on the bus. I would go to Wall Street. I'd go to the meatpacking district, where it was disgusting then. It wasn't like how it's like all fancy now. Go to the Lower East Side, which was disgusting.
I love how your tone of voice on Wall Street was like the most pejorative. Like, I'd go to Rikers Island to hang out. I'd interview prostitutes. I'd go to Wall Street.
Well, because actually Wall Street was pretty dead, and nobody would talk to me. Like, they were like, hey, we're running a Ponzi scheme. We can't talk to you. Whereas in the meatpacking district, it was unbelievable how many Johns would talk to me. Like, they would be like drunk or whatever, and then they would realize this going on TV, and they had already just signed a release form. So whatever.
So did these air on an HBO internet?
No, so that's the thing. So yes, so I had hundreds of. I did this again for 4 years. So let's say 200 times. 20 people per time, whatever that is. So like several thousand people I interviewed. Probably the beginning of it's like the original podcast really for me. But my goal was to have a TV show. So this was like a massive experiment of doing.
And why did you want the TV show because it was fun or profitable, or you wanted to be famous, or why did you want that?
No. I mean, I was only interested in writing at this point. So I was offered 2 jobs when I moved to New York City, HBO and JP Morgan. HBO was paying $40,000 a year. This is 1994. JP Morgan offered me $80,000 a year. I took HBO because I figured this is how I was trying to write a novel. And then as soon as I got to HBO, I started writing screenplays and submitting them places. And so I figured, this is my backdoor way. I always try to figure out, so this is a point that I always do. I always try to figure out the backdoor way to do something. I figure if I do this web series and it gets popular and it's at HBO, they'll give me money to shoot a pilot, which they did. Sheila Nevins, who was the head of documentaries at HBO, she said, let's do a pilot. She gave me some money. We got a producer, John Alpert. I don't know if you know, and he's done a bunch of documentaries. I think The Hookers at Hunt Point, so classics. And so it was a backdoor way for me, the guy working in the IT department. Suddenly I was shooting a pilot for HBO. The reason I say the experiment didn't necessarily work is the pilot never aired, but it gave me a lot of experience. It gave me a huge amount of knowledge about doing interviews, making content that's creative. It was the first time I was paid to write something, because I would write intros for each chapter in this. And then I learned with a guy who made 50 documentaries how to make the sort of documentary that aired on HBO.
So let me ask you this. When you say the experiment didn't work, so, I mean, I think most people would hear that and identify with what you're saying, right? Because if you attempt something and it doesn't succeed, or you don't get the outcome you wanted, you consider it a failure to some degree. But let me ask you this. I mean...
I agree. My goal for that experiment was to have a show on TV. But I'm not disappointed with what happened.
Right. Well, that's what I wanted to ask, because I think a lot of people... So do people here watch the NFL? Yeah. Some, like... Yeah, I know that. I didn't even move my head in his direction.
When he asked that question, he only looked at you.
James, when you ask James a question like that, he'll say, "Is that a sport game?" And you realize that no. So raise your hand if you watch the NFL a little bit or no. Okay, so not so much. So the NFL is a great product, et cetera, et cetera. It's also controversial, et cetera, et cetera. But my point is, what's interesting about it is there's a lot of decision making. It's a very unusual, I mean, if you think about football not as a physical thing that you may like or not like, if you think about it like a chess match, whatever, like a lot of football people throughout history have called it like a multi-dimensional chess match, because you've got 11 people on either side of the ball and they all move on every play. So it's extraordinarily complex and dynamic in that way. And therefore, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of deceit, there's a lot of there's a lot of decision making. So last week, there were 2 games, I think, that both came down to a last second, decision of whether you score a touchdown, then you have a choice to either go for 2 points by running a play from the 2-yard line or did they move it back? 2-yard line? And that's fairly lower. That's probably, I don't know what the overall probability of success is there. Maybe 40% if I had to guess, but I don't know. Maybe higher? Right, but if you add up all the going for it and succeeding, I think the probability is between 40 and 50%, but I may be wrong. In that neighborhood, let's say it's 60% even. Or you can kick an extra point for 1 point, and the probability there is about 91% now, okay? So it's either, they moved it back. It used to be like 99. So if you're a coach and your team has just come back and tied the game, or sorry, you've come back and you've got like 1 second left on the clock and you're 1 point behind, you can kick an extra point and tie and now go to overtime and take a chance that you'll win in overtime, or you can go for the 2-point conversion, and if you make it, you win, and that's awesome, and if you miss it, you lose. So there's no, you're not hedging your bet at all. And last week, 2 people went for it. I think it was last week, and I think in week 1 too. And the guy who got it wrong, or the guy whose team lost, like, it was an amazing comeback. They were on the road. If they had made the play and scored 2 points, they would have won. It would have been a great victory for this team, but they didn't. And everybody basically came down on him and said, you're an idiot, because you could have kicked the extra point, ensured a tie, and gone to overtime. And his view was, well, if you look at what we're here to do, which is win, not tie and take a chance, and if you look at the probability, which was pretty decent, 40 to 50%, I think I made the right choice, but the outcome wasn't what we wanted it to be. Now, only in football can you not say that. Like, in the corporate world, you can say that. People might think you're wrong.
Or in something like poker, where the odds are very clear in front of you, that even you could always make, you could even have an 80% chance against winning, but if the pot odds are greater than, I don't know, 5 to 1 or whatever, then you should always make the decision, and in the long run, you win money. But there's no long run in football.
So my question is basically, how can more people do experiments or try things where the outcome may not be what they desired, but the experience and knowledge gained, et cetera, are still net positive? How can more people be encouraged to do basically what you've done a lot, which is fail productively without feeling like you're a, quote, failure per se?
Right, and so...
That was a funny question. I agree, thank you.
So take this as an example, right? I didn't get the goal that I wanted, but just like, you did hundreds of interviews in the 90s. You were a reporter for the New York Times, right? Or a bunch of places. You wrote a bunch of books. All that kind of geared you towards being an interviewer for Freakonomics and for Freakonomics podcast, for me with my podcast. So, and then when I started with the hedge fund world, I started off investing a small amount of money. I started off reaching out to hedge fund managers, again, experimenting and going the backdoor way instead of working at Goldman Sachs, getting an MBA, working at a hedge fund, and then starting one. That's kind of the traditional path. There's always, what you gain from these experiments, even if they're tiny ones, is that you get knowledge from each one.
No, I'm buying what you're selling,
right.
But I think a lot of people don't. So I'm asking if you could distill the James Altucher-ness of
right.
willingness to fail in pursuit of longer-term growth, whatever, because people don't like to fail. People don't
right.
like to even try things where they might fail.
So my suggestion, and this is what I even should have done then, I think I was making too big of, the experiments were taking up too much time, like years, but practice doing smaller experiments. So find an experiment that will take only a couple of days of your time, or an hour of your time, or not so much money. And you
just get used to the idea of failing, get used to the feeling of failing.
Can I give you an example of the past few days?
Yes, please.
So I put on Kickstarter a fundraiser. I wanted to raise money. I wanted to crowdfund an idea I had.
What was the idea?
I wanted to buy Greenland. So Greenland is sort of a country, sort of not, that's owned by Denmark. Donald Trump tweeted, "I want to buy Greenland." and everybody yelled at him. And Denmark said it's not for sale, which, as you would probably counter from the Freakonomics viewpoint, is essentially there's a price for everything.
We did an episode called, about 5 years ago, called Should the U.S. Merge with Mexico? And it was not a joke. I mean, it was actually the president of Mexico, who we interviewed, thought it was a joke. He didn't like the idea, but everybody else saw merit in it. So no, I'm totally on board with buying other. I think buying other countries is way better than just invading them and taking all their stuff.
Sure. And when I actually so coming up with this idea for this fundraiser, which at first was like a joke in my mind, and I had never done any kind of crowdfunded project on Kickstarter. So I learned Kickstarter, I learned GoFundMe, I learned Indiegogo, I kind of learned the pros and cons. So I have to do some research in that. And then I started doing research on why we would want to buy Greenland. And I actually saw there were huge reasons why one would want to buy Greenland.
So you decided that you would be the one to buy it?
Yeah, so I wanted to buy it and anybody who participated in the fundraiser. So I
and
mapped
how much
it all
were you
out.
trying to raise? How much were you trying to raise?
100 million. So on Kickstarter, which obviously had never been done before.
And this was last week?
This was 2 days ago.
Right.
And
so what do you have now?
by the way,
50,
every day
you have like 50, 60 million now? How much do you have now?
No, because here's what happened. So I wrote it all up for Kickstarter, did all my research. There was like 20 reasons why you'd want to buy Greenland. Put it all on Kickstarter. I had the rewards, like for $1, you become a citizen. For $100, you would get an acre of land. For $10,000, I would make you like a duke. And so I had a bunch of rewards.
Wait, how many acres of land are there?
Almost 500 million acres.
500 million.
Yeah.
So enough that if everybody gives 100, you still give an acre, you still got plenty left over?
Oh, yeah. Because there's 56,000 Eskimos living there, and you want to leave some, tiny little area for them to stand in. And
really charitable of you. Yeah.
So, by the way, Greenland has the highest suicide rate of any country in the world.
That's
if it
not
were a
true.
country.
It's not true.
It
Just
is.
looked it up the other day.
So Lithuania would be number one, but Greenland's not a country. So that's why it's not on the list.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
So Lithuania is
My
42 out of 100,000. Greenland is 83 out of 100,000 per year. So, but anyway.
So if you just wait a little while longer, you won't even have to buy it.
No, because Denmark.
Sorry.
It was amazing the reaction I got from Danes. That was another thing I learned. But Kickstarter immediately, like within seconds, rejected my whole thing. I spent all this time building this, and they rejected it. And I figured it was an algorithmic. Maybe they assumed I wouldn't raise $100 million, so the algorithm just rejected it. And then GoFundMe let me publish this, and I actually started raising money. People started sharing it and donating money, because I said I was going to return any money if I didn't succeed in buying Greenland.
Can I just ask you a slight tangent? But the way you said Trump's name indicates that you're not a big fan of Trump. I have no idea if you are, but you said
I honestly never. I think issue by issue. I don't really. Another thing I believe in is I don't believe there should be any president, but I actually like this idea of buying Greenland.
Okay, but here's the question. I was just curious. The feedback to your effort to raise money to buy Greenland, how much of it dealt with the fact that the idea was made public not so long ago by Trump?
I would say about 20 or 30%.
And did that work against you or in your favor?
A little bit in my favor, because other people responded to them. So other people would say, you didn't read his article about it. You didn't read it. Other people would say, I'll tell you one. So one person from Denmark said, what's wrong with all of you Americans? This is an insult to all people from Denmark. And I responded, you guys lose $700 million a year on subsidizing Greenland, and it's got the highest suicide rate in the world, highest unemployment rate, huge alcoholism. It's not like you're doing such a great job over there. So give someone else a chance. And why not knock off some of your debt with the amount I would raise to pay you?
And what was your stated purpose of owning it?
Because it is so important in terms of natural resources. So Greenland has 38% of the world's rare earth minerals. Right. Profit and also protection. 90% of the world's production right now comes from China, which is, affecting the balance of world trade. So if there was some independent, and also there's a company mining the rare earth minerals in Greenland called Greenland Minerals. Guess who owns it? The Chinese. So, and the EU begs Denmark, don't do this. And Denmark's like, no, it's Greenland Minerals, it's okay. And But anyway, what happened was, GoFundMe let me raise money for a few days, and then they wrote me a note and said, you know what, we're closing it down. You're probably not going to raise.
And why? Because it was too much? Or
No, I think their stated reason was they were afraid of chargebacks. And they,
chargeback is when you're unsuccessful in your campaign?
No. When if people are unhappy during the process and they call up American Express, it's like, oh no, I didn't really donate. And so that's a problem if you're not going to achieve the goal. There's certain loss that GoFundMe could have that they could have discussed with me, and maybe I would have worked out a solution, but they automatically...
Okay, I have a question for you. If since you can't buy Greenland, or at least this week, if there's one country that you could buy as a representative of the United States or just as James Altucher, what country do you most want to own?
You know, I've just spent all this time thinking about Greenland.
And it can't be. I know that's your dream.
I'm obsessed with Greenland.
History full of dreamers who can't get their first dream and they have to go down the list.
I was even reading on Google Maps, there's reviews of every location. I was reading the reviews. Like, why would someone give a 1-star review to the Nuuk International Airport, Nuuk being the capital of Greenland? So that's all I've been thinking about for the past few days is Greenland.
I know, but you're not answering. This is why the show stopped. I would ask a question, James would not answer it, and then it would end.
Okay, number 2, I would get Tonga. So for some reason...
Where's Tonga?
Tonga is in the middle of Polynesia. It's a kingdom.
Okay. What is Polynesia? Is that a group of countries?
Yeah, it's kind of like all the islands.
Is Tahiti part of Polynesia?
I think so,
Anybody know?
Yeah, it's
is
all
it
the
all
countries between,
French?
like, think of it, no, it's French,
it's all
English.
French?
It's a lot of them.
Tahiti's French, right? Or was French, right?
It's all the islands and countries in between, let's say, Hawaii and New Zealand.
All right, so why do you want Tonga?
I don't know, I can't give a full answer because I've been fascinated by this. It's one of the bigger countries in this area, and it seems easy to invade.
You don't really want it, is what I'm thinking. You don't really.
That's right.
But here's the thing. I think most people actually would want a country. Can we just have audience? No, I don't. No, I'm not asking for consensus. I want to hear, if you could own a country, it would be what?
Any country?
Any country.
Probably a small one like Tonga.
Yeah, there you go.
You are such a copycat.
Or
Tonga.
Or here's another one. Here's another great one.
But think of
Andorra in the
does no one want to own like Italy or France or England?
It's too hard.
Oh, no.
Greenland's huge, and there's only 56,000 people you have to deal
got a
with.
suicide rate of like 90%, and the
because
Chinese are taking your
I'm
rare earth
blaming
minerals.
Denmark
So
on
how
that.
good is that? Okay.
I'm blaming Denmark. So the point is, that's a tiny experiment. Took me half a day's worth of effort. It was fun. It had the potential to be interesting. I didn't think I was going to raise $100 million.
And the next time a country comes up for sale, you're going to be ready.
I know exactly what to do. But that's also an experiment in me getting out there in a different way than just writing an article or doing a podcast. Yeah. So that could have been a vehicle for that, or
Can
not.
I just say, that was a very good answer that was very generalizable. So are you encouraging people to do more frequent and short and probably unsuccessful outcome experiments?
My thing is do one thing each day that seems slightly scary, and even if it's very tiny, try hard to think of something that nobody else has done. No one's ever done a crowdfunding post for a country. At the time I did the 3 a.m., no one had ever done a web series. So try to think of something little, though, that nobody else has ever done. And
do you keep a list of these things in your waiter's notepad?
Yeah.
What's next?
So what's next is I've been collecting. I don't have. Hold on one second. Hold on.
Money.
I will show you, and then we'll conclude this question because I have questions for you too. I have money in my pocket.
What
specifically,
country was that? Was that Greenland money?
Here, no. Check that out. So that's so. Try to figure out what that is.
It looks Korean. Is it Korean money?
Half right.
North Korean money?
100% right. So it's North Korean money. That's 1978 issued, 100 won. and it's Kim Jong-il, the father of the current dictator, on it.
You think it says 1978 on it? You really think this is a 1978 issue bill? What makes you know that?
The person, maybe I'm fooled by the person who sold it to me.
Okay.
Maybe it's forged 1978.
So wait, so you
but
bought like a fairly pristine 40-year-old North Korean bill and you're carrying it in your pocket, folded up.
I have
so many of them that
I have a lot of North Korean won and Iraqi dinars as well from pre-2002. And here's the thing I want to try. This is a Freakonomics-ish experiment. I want to go into a variety of stores, restaurants, delis, whatever, get a cup of coffee, and then when he charged me $1, say, I don't have $1. All I've got is this 100 North Korean won.
Now,
can you take that?
Would you go into a deli that happens to be owned by that rare American businessman who came from North Korea? Because otherwise, you think you have any chance of success?
I don't know. I've tried it in a few places.
And how'd it go over?
They've all said no. So,
Really? Really? I'm shocked.
But here's the interesting thing. Some people actually don't want to touch the money. Like some people, I've never noticed that before with money. Like usually people could they don't care about touching it. It's like I'll give someone a book, they'll hold the book. But actually people like back off from the money.
Do
they don't
you
want to
say
touch
this
it.
is North Korean money?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I said all I've got is 100 North Korean won. This is worth $30 in North Korea right now. There's like an exchange rate. And said you probably...
What do you think that's about, that they don't want to touch it?
I don't know. And I've noticed this several times. This is one thing. This is what experiments do. I'm in preparing for this experiment because I want to videotape it and document the results, which again costs me little and takes half a day. But just practicing this a little bit to get ready, I've noticed a good 10 to 20% physically pull back from the money, so they
And it's
can't
not
touch
you
it.
that they're pulling back from.
It could be for me, but I only notice it when I'm holding North Korean money.
Right, but it could be that the kind of person who would come into my restaurant and eat my food and then offer me North Korean money might be the kind of person. I'm just guessing.
No, but that could be that if you're doing something that's not the protocol transaction,
right,
then there maybe something goes off in their brain. Something
has anyone pulled back?
By the way,
has anyone pulled back from the dinar?
Yes, but it's not even when I
have you tried Canadian money?
Canadian money they'll take, so because they know it's about the same.
Have
whatever.
you tried English money?
No, but I've also offered this to North Korean won to friends who normally wouldn't pull back, and I've even seen the reaction there that like some people will be like, "I'm not touching that." Like one person actually said that. And so there must be some, I don't know what it is in the brain that they don't want to touch
You
the
know
North
that
Korean
I
one.
believe virtually everything that anyone tells me, but I have a hard time believing this.
It's true. I didn't know this would happen as well. That's the interesting thing about experiments.
Do we
is that
believe, James, that people pull back when they hear that it's North Korean money? We do?
She's seen it happen.
All right. So I know you're married to him, so you've got to believe him at least.
No, but she saw the person who said, "I'm not touching that."
So what do we think is the mechanism by which people are afraid to or reluctant to touch money from North Korea? What do you think is behind that? Yes?
Being nerve agents,
Really? You think
Being-
so? Nerve
being what?
agents? Man.
toxic nerve agents.
Oh, yeah, maybe that.
Or listening device?
Maybe you're wanted by the state and they're trying to kill you and you have some nerve agents on your hand and you're like, oh,
Not only do I find that answer more believable than that sounds so crazy that I'm going to buy it.
Here's my theory is that obviously we have financial sanctions against North Korea, so maybe people have worked out the logic that if they hold this money, they might be guilty of a crime.
You think so?
I mean, that's another
Anybody
theory.
buying that?
I'm willing to believe any theory. I actually don't know the answer. All I know is that this happens, and that's one of the results so far of this experiment.
And what would you say is the primary question you're trying to answer with this experiment?
Nothing. I just want to... Sometimes you don't have to have a goal either. It's interesting to do interesting things. The interesting thing is to do things and not to think about things. It's just doing this is unusual, and it's fun, and satisfies some curiosity of mine.
And where'd you get the money?
In this particular case, I went to... we were at an auction, and they had a bunch of people selling currencies. And I bought a bunch of currencies. I bought a $3 bill. There's some states used to issue their own currencies, so some state had a $3 bill.
And what'd you pay for the North Korean money? If you don't mind me
I
asking.
think like $5 for 100 of these, something like that.
So they're like coasters, basically.
Yeah.
At that point.
Yeah, and then I bought the Iraqi dinars. I bought all these weird $2 bills.
You didn't offer me.
Here, you can have it. You did hold it, so obviously you were.
I had no fear.
You had
Although
no
now
fear.
that you mentioned nerve agent, now I'm okay. Can I keep it though?
Yeah, you can keep it. I have thousands of North Korean won. There's lots of experiments I could do with this. So that's what I mean by a small experiment. Cost me little to nothing, and it's interesting, and I learned something from it. And you could do basically one every day, and over the course of a year, you're going to learn thousands of things. And so I'll call it the 10,000 experiment rule for success, and
But
it
when you
works.
began this line of talking, you were kind of down on yourself for doing the 10,000 experiments.
Because I think I wasn't calculating the stakes correctly. So now I'm doing things I feel are just as interesting, but the stakes are much less. So, and this applies to like investing. One thing I find out in decades of investing is that the smaller amount you invest in a project, probably the more money you make, because you're less governed by fear. And if it goes up a little bit, there's less incentive for you to sell because you're looking for the big, you're willing to ride like a big gain and really create value, as opposed to like short gains, which you'll never be able to see the long-term outcome if you are always, investing too big and then taking profits too quickly. So this applies to experiments too. Small experiments can compound to huge results, as opposed to having too high a stake in something working out, and then you get depressed, disappointed, you don't plan it carefully enough because you're willing to spend years working at it, and it could be life-altering to fail in an experiment that's too large. So that I would say is, this is a way, to use the word choose yourself, this is a way I could do things that nobody's ever done before, risk little, learn from them, move on to the next experiment, and then hit the accelerator on anything that seems more interesting. So if I'm writing a book and it seems to be working, and people seem to like what I've been writing, I could hit the accelerator, finish that book, write another book, whatever. Similar to what you did, you wrote Freakonomics, that one worked. You wrote a sequel. Other books, you didn't necessarily write a sequel. Those are almost like little experiments, or those are much bigger. You're staking a year or two of your life and writing this huge book. But, sometimes those experiments work out too. All right, now I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
So this is related to Freakonomics. I remember as you were writing it, I remember the initial New York Times article that it was based on that you wrote. It was in the Sunday magazine. So I remember everyone was fascinated with this article you wrote about this economist, Stephen Levitt in Chicago. And I remember even thinking then, so I'll ask it now, economics, when I think of my economics classes from college, I think the only thing I could really remember is the phrase, price is a function of supply and demand. So more demand, the price goes up. More supply, the price goes down, and so on. I think of Freakonomics as price equals supply is a function of supply, demand, and some mystical factor, the freakishness of it, and hence Freakonomics. So what is the difference? What is the difference between Freakonomics and economics, or any nomics? Because there became a lot of nomics after your book.
Well, to be fair, there were a lot of nomics. Reaganomics was pretty prominent
But
before,
there were books like Soccernomics and...
Yeah, which is, by the way, has anybody read Soccernomics? Zero? It is a really, really good book. If you like soccer at all, it's kind of about it's not just about the business of soccer. Anyway, it's a very, very good book. So the difference between, economics and Freakonomics...
And just to add to this question, I noticed a lot, like when we went on Neil deGrasse Tyson's Star Talk, he was asking you all these economics questions, kind of showing, there's a huge difference between Freakonomics and economics. I think
he was asking left-handed questions about space economics, which I'm not an authority in, unfortunately.
Well, I don't necessarily think of Freakonomics as economics. And so this also gave credence. I think a lot of people ask you about economics when actually Freakonomics is sort of almost a different field.
So, I mean, honestly, I don't think Freakonomics is a thing that needs to be like defined, because Freakonomics is basically whatever we write about. I mean, it's a
I don't believe
rubric.
that though.
Well, I mean, I could say that there are a bunch of tenets. So the tenets would be that it is kind of a hybrid version of storytelling that is empirical and journalistic, right? So most storytelling, if you read nonfiction books, or if you read newspapers and magazines, most nonfiction is not very empirical. It tends to be more anecdotal or experiential. Most academic research and most economic research particularly is very empirical and not very narrative driven, or not very, storytelling. So if I had to define it, I would say it's a kind of hybrid of empirical and narrative or storytelling journalism.
Can you give an example of the storytelling that makes you, like, if you hear a certain story, you feel to yourself, that's very Freakonomics-ish?
It's not so much when you hear I guess there are a few different elements of stories that make them interesting to me and Levitt. Surprising causes of effects that you thought you knew.
Like what?
Oh gosh, I should have 1,000 at the top of my head. Okay, so here's one. Tiger Woods is the most famous golfer, I guess, in history. Easily, some people think he's the best golfer in history, a case of which could be pretty easily made. He's also one of the relatively very, very, very few African American. He doesn't consider himself African American. He considers himself Cablinasian, Caucasian, Black, Indian, and Asian. But most people identify him as Black. Okay, just the way race works in this country. And so he's been the most prominent golfer the past 25 years, and also one of the very, very few African Americans competing at a high level. There's another guy now, Harold Varner III, for those, right? Everybody loves Harold Varner III, not a lot of golf fans. So
I knew this, by the way, would turn into a golf podcast.
Right, there you go. So you were right. So interestingly, before Tiger Woods, so everybody kind of assumes that Tiger Woods was like the beginning of pro-Black golfers, and that there would be a lot more. And a lot of people have been very disappointed that there haven't been more, because it seems like an equity issue and an access issue at a time when golf is getting much more global. This kid won on the PGA Tour last week named Joaquin Niemann, who I think is from Chile, and he came from the Latin American Tour. That's the first time that ever happened. There are a lot of great Chinese golfers, a lot of great South Korean male golfers. Half of like the LPGA winners are South Korean women. Like, it's become very, very global, which is exciting if you like, whatever, sports, globalism, blah, 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 blah. But very few African American golfers. And people say, why? What's the reason? And, it's kind of the typical reasons you would expect. The median African American, let's say, might not have as much access to golf as one might like. Maybe because of a history of discrimination and exclusion, that African Americans who might be inclined toward golf instead go to sports where they've been more historically larger, better represented, et cetera. But there's a different theory. And the theory is this. Has to do with automation. Can you guess? I bet you can figure it out, but without me even saying it. It has to do with technology.
Were they 3D printing clubs? Or the price of clubs was going straight down, so it was easier for...
Think technology like 30 or 40 years ago. You guys will figure it out collectively. Come on, we can do a collective hive mind thing. Even if you know nothing about golf, when you watch people, if you drive by a golf course, what do you see? Just like what do you see people...
Sand and grass?
Yes, golf carts. So before there were golf carts, there were what? Caddies, right? So before golf carts happened, which was, they started a while ago, but they became really common like 40, 50 years ago. Before golf carts, there were caddies. So when you were like a member of a golf club or went somewhere that had the setup, you wouldn't carry your own bag. There'd be people there. And a lot of them, especially in the South and Midwest, were African American. And there were a boatload of really, 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 really good African American players in the pro and just below the pro levels. There were never a ton in the PGA, but there were a lot of really good players, in part because they had access because they were caddies. They had access to the course. So it would look to be, so to me, that's the kind of story that you hear where there's like a technological improvement, and you wouldn't think that it would possibly, have downstream effects about race and who participates in something. But that kind of thing happens all the time in the world. And for me, that's a super fun thing to figure out. So to do that, I just, read a lot of history, talk to a lot of people, look for surprising things,
So wait, connect that to Tiger Woods though. So all these caddies stopped being caddies because of golf carts, but they still wanted to be.
There were a lot of African Americans who before had access to golf courses and to practicing and playing and getting really good, who once the golf cart happened, that access diminished greatly. Here's another one. We'll make it a quiz. Who in the last 6 months has had mutton for dinner or lunch? Right, I'm guessing 0. Okay, right?
What is mutton?
Mutton is lamb that's older than, it's either 2 years or 3 years, although I think some places count it as 2 years and some places count it as 3 years. It's basically old lamb. Okay, so some people eat lamb chops or rack of lamb, but mutton is older lamb. Okay, mutton used to be one of the most popular meats in America. So like if you go way back, pork was number 1, then beef, and America got really good at raising beef, really, really good. Kind of set a world standard. But even then, mutton was still a very, very widely consumed meat. And then right after World War II, mutton went from being very widely consumed in the US to almost not eaten at all. Can anyone tell me why? Say again? Ooh, very close. Cotton was the guess. And you're not right, but you're on the right track. And cotton, and therefore what? Why would you say cotton? Clothing, which would have replaced wool, right? So you're like 95% right. So instead of cotton, it was nylon. So basically, DuPont and a couple others invented nylon during, kind of in the lead up to World War II, and it had a lot of military applications, right? And once it was perfected, and then after the war, the use of wool, you didn't need as much wool, because you were making a lot of clothes started to be made out of synthetics. So if you didn't need a lot of wool, what used to be the case was that ranchers and farmers would have these big flocks of sheep around to shear and shear and shear wool. And then when you were done with them, they became mutton. And once the need for that was no longer there, then the byproduct of the sheep shearing, the mutton, fell off our menu. So to me, what I like about those stories are they're prima facie interesting, to me at least. They may not be to anybody else. There's data in them that is real and often surprising. And I think that if you kind of train yourself to examine effects and look for causes that may not be the proximate cause, then it makes your life more interesting. Is
this what attracted you to Stephen Levitt's story in the first place? Like, how did you end up writing the initial article that became Freakonomics?
So
and by the way, this sounds like a very Stephen Dubner-ish thing to look for these two dots that seem disconnected, but you can connect them via a story. Hence, your success as an article writer, podcaster, book writer, and so on.
And we know everyone loves stories about golf and mutton.
Exactly. And horse manure, which was similar from Super Freakonomics, right?
Yeah.
Where that was the big environmental problem in New York City. Nobody knew how to solve it, and in Super Freakonomics, you explain what happened.
Oh, I thought you said, and then Super Freakonomics solved the horse manure problem. Yeah,
it would have if it was written back then.
We did. So, do you guys know the horse manure problem? No, it was a big.
It was the global warming of 1900.
It was a huge problem, only in urban areas. So basically, cities were powered by horses. New York City had around 1880 or so. New York City had 250,000 horses. And I think there were a little over 1 million people. So that's a lot of horses. And horses were used for not just transportation, but for manufacturing, all this stuff. And so they produced an amazing amount of horse manure. In the old days, when cities were getting bigger, but not so big and not so densely populated by horses, there was a robust market for horse manure as a fertilizer. And New York and a lot of other cities around the world, London, Paris, were surrounded by agricultural areas, and farmers would pay for the horse manure. But then in cities like New York and London and Paris, there came to be a horse manure glut, where there was an oversupply and the price fell to negative. You'd have to pay to get rid of it, and nobody wanted to do that.
How much feet was at the end of each day on every street?
Well, I don't know if anybody can answer that, but there are photos that show, like here, you go on these side streets of the Upper West Side, and there would often be, I mean, it was a problem, it was a different problem at different times of the year. In the winter when it froze as these kind of mountains that became covered by snow. And then the spring when it thawed, that was the nastiest because then it became runoff. The reason that so many, these brownstones, many of which are copied on the Dutch, and many of which have raised, there's the parlor floor below, but then there's the big set of steps. So when you enter a brownstone, you're actually entering on the second floor. The reason that was architected that way was to escape the ground level lake of horse manure that was kind of constant, at least in the spring and the winter. So yeah, it was a big problem. It was bad for public health, et cetera. And then, so everybody was basically saying that there is no way we can solve the horse manure problem because we can't have cities without the horse, but with the manure, we can't really have cities. And so if you read the history, like the smart money of the day was saying, we need to depopulate our cities. We can't survive. And then that problem was solved by the invention of the internal combustion engine, the electric streetcar. And, virtually overnight, the horse manure problem went away. So I like those weird cause and effects. That was a long answer to a short question. Sorry. Getting back to your actual question about Levitt, Freakonomics. So I was writing a book about what I call the psychology of money. So what we now know is behavioral economics. I've become very interested. This is, 15, 17, 18 years ago.
2002.
Well, I'd started on that book in maybe 1999 or so. And I'd been reading, like a lot of people have been reading these last several years, the work of Danny Kahneman and also Amos Tversky, who were these two Israeli psychologists who had a very interesting way of looking at what psychology was, and they mostly explored the science of decision-making. And they tried to understand why humans make such often odd and seemingly irrational decisions. And they were both very brilliant in different ways, and they were a very good team. Anyway, that work got picked up really by just a handful of people in America, including Richard Thaler, who's an economist at the University of Chicago, and they turned it into what we now know as behavioral economics. So within behavioral economics, there's a lot of psychology and sociology. There's also some finance. There's behavioral finance is a big subcomponent of that. And I was writing a book kind of about the behavioral finance part. And the book was going to be called Money Makes Me Happy, parenthesis, except when it doesn't. And it was about this mystery of money and how money, kind of like very few other things in life, maybe religion, maybe sex, maybe a few other things, is such a fraught topic that people make decisions around it in a way that doesn't seem rational. And that's how I met James, because James, I was looking for people to write about. James was very much not rational. And James was in an interesting place financially that I'll let you tell them about. And so I was working on this book, and I was, most of the reporting was done. So when you write a book, you usually often report or research. This was for maybe 2 or 3, 4 years. I've been doing the research, and I'd started to write. And you were the first chapter, actually. You were part of the first chapter. But then I had worked at the New York Times Magazine. They asked me if I would write a piece about this guy named Steve Levitt at the University of Chicago. And he had one very famous piece of research, very controversial, about abortion and crime. He made the argument in a paper with a colleague named John Donahue, who's a very good legal scholar and economist, that of all the explanations for why crime started to fall, like around 1990 in New York, but cities around the country, that most of the explanations that most people gave really empirically didn't hold up under inspection. And they made the argument that one very compelling argument was the legalization of abortion in the form of Roe v. Wade in 1973, the mechanism being that when more women who were not ready to have a child had a means whereby to not have a child, that would produce a generation later less crime, because the social science research shows us that there are a few things that are worse or more difficult for a child to endure and grow up and to have a good productive life than being in a home where they're not wanted, where there aren't resources, where there's not love and time and so on. So this was a very controversial topic. When my editor at the Times Magazine asked me to go write a piece about Levitt, because he just won an award, I turned it down like 3 or 4 times, which shows like how not smart I am, because like it turned out to be a really good idea. But I was already working on this other book, and I called Levitt, and we had a lot of nice conversations, but he had nothing to do with behavioral economics. He thought it was kind of a joke. He didn't do anything around money, but he had all this other research about like abortion and crime I mentioned, but also sumo wrestlers and collusion and cheating teachers and real estate agents and how the name that people give their babies, whether it affects their life, the children's outcomes or not. And so finally, I was going to be in Chicago for something else anyway, and I looked up Levitt, and I read all his papers, and I interviewed him for like 3 days, and I wrote the piece, and it was so interesting that I decided to put the book about you, I'm sorry, in the drawer.
I was perfectly fine with it. An entire book documenting all my failures. I wasn't ready for it then.
I think I sent you at some point the chapter, didn't I?
Yeah, I liked it.
Yeah, it was like a third of the way done, but yeah. But that book would have been good too.
So it seems what's very Stephen Dubner-ish in your writing is this idea that behind interesting data or weird data conclusions, there's probably going to be an interesting story as well. And I think that's left out a lot in science.
Sometimes not. It's really interesting. The more I think about it, the more I do, because now, we did a few books, and now I do a weekly radio show, or starts as a podcast, becomes a radio show. And the more I realize, there are some formulas essentially for a story, but there are a lot of them. There are a lot of, sometimes you'll find data that might seem interesting or it's not, or you'll find data that's interesting, but you can't find a way to talk about it in a way that's interesting, or it might be interesting data but not meaningful. Then sometimes you'll find stories that you want to tell that you can't find the right data for. So it feels like every piece we do is as hard as the first one in a way, because you kind of just want it to be.
But that's because there aren't easy ways to connect the dots. It's unusual ways that connect the dots that yet require a little extra work, which is what makes it stand out as a story.
I guess that's true. I'm trying to think. Right now, we're working on a piece about the opioid crisis, or whatever you want to call it. And I was reluctant to do that because, so many people are so interested in it, and so many people are affected by it. It is a widespread issue for sure on many different dimensions. But I couldn't find a way in for a long time.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
Just riffing on this. John and I were just researching this right before we walked over here. Purdue Pharmaceuticals, which makes OxyContin, a lot of people have allegedly, I guess, died because of this opioid. They spun off a company several years ago that makes one of the top-selling laxatives. So opiates constipate you. Laxatives, of course, relieve that. Do you think that was the plan?
Perfect
to kind
circle.
of kind of dominate both ends, so to speak, of that spectrum? That's an interesting.
I think
two data points.
I think that could be a plan in the way that I have a theory that in England, London is talking about secession now, seceding from England and the UK. And in fact, there's an officially registered party called the Londependence Party.
If you want to crowdfund buying London, I know where to go.
That would be a little pricier than Greenland, yeah. So, so I've come to the conclusion. So here's the way you connect this daisy chain. London is kind of interested in secession. Londoners voted fairly significantly for Remain, not to leave the EU. The Brexit referendum was, as we know, launched by David Cameron, who wasn't really a Londoner originally, but very much a Londoner now, and his circle was plainly a London circle. So my theory is that the Brexit referendum was just a backdoor way to enable London to secede by getting people so irate about Brexit in the first place that now London just has a clean entry, a clean exit. So if you buy that story, I'll buy your Purdue coming and going story.
Can I buy it with North Korean won?
You can try.
So,
You want another question?
well, I think actually I just got the rap signal.
They want you to rap?
Yeah, they want us to rap. I'm not gonna rap with lyrics, but just gonna end.
That was a great ending.
Thanks for this was the question of the day reunion. Steve? What did you think? Like, did it feel like the good old days? We never did it. Oh, we only did it once, right? Live in front of an audience.
One? Yeah, that was a different one.
It's the very first time I did stand up.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
yeah.
you did stand up as well.
I did stand up there. Yeah. I thought this was nowhere near as bad as it could have been. I'm going to say that. And I enjoyed you all, and I enjoyed you. This is, the reason I don't do this is because I'm not very good at it. So I like to do my, I'm a writer. I like to have 20 cracks at something.
I don't think that's true. When you were doing the Tell Me Something I Don't Know podcast, which was a podcast meant to be in front of a live audience, I thought you were a very good host of that.
Right, but
it's a lot of work.
Those have a lot of pre-production in them, too. So a lot of live shows that everybody does are, you essentially do as much work as you can. So we're getting ready to do this live show taped in Chicago, and the topic is foreign policy. And we're having Chuck Hagel, the former Secretary of Defense, on. It's I don't just show up for those, because I would be a total idiot. But to do a live, because our show is very much a studio show. We interview for every 45-minute show, we probably have 8 or 10 hours of tape, and most of it is really boring. So for those of you who listen to Freakonomics Radio, you're welcome. We cut out all the boring parts, but which do better? Do the live shows when you put them on the podcast? Do those do better, or do the highly produced shows do better?
Uh,
The studio ones do better because they are better. I think you're going to make a better show if you have 10 hours of tape than if you have 2 hours of tape.
I think in general, the highly produced podcasts, I think the more hours you put into production and pre-production, the more downloads the podcast gets in general. Not always, but in general.
Yeah, and then there's Joe Rogan, who I think doesn't, he just goes, but it's obviously very, right? It's very successful, obviously, plainly, right?
But then you think of stuff like Hardcore History, Serial, Startup.
This American Life is 8 million hours for every hour.
Yeah. So I think in general, the average.
Of course, they use the Huck Finn or the Tom Sawyer model of work. It's here's these stories that need to be made, and an army of freelancers make them. And they pay them. It's not like they don't pay them. But it's a good way to do it. But our show's unfortunately not like that.
So one quick question. So if nobody got any value out of this whatsoever, this next thing I'm going to ask you, which you could answer in 1 minute, how did this skinny Asian kid, Kobayashi, win the world's hot dog eating competition? What was the exact technique he used in... I'll give you 90 seconds.
You mean physically or
physically?
Philosophically, what was the technique?
I don't care about
physically.
Physically.
Oh.
How many hot dogs did he eat, and how did he do it?
So the first time he won it, I think he ate 50 at Coney Island, which was just a little over double the world record, but he's since got it up to, I think, about 72 or 3 in 10 minutes. It used to be 12 minutes. So the physical method, I'll tell you the physical method, but I think that the philosophical or the methodological reasoning is way more important, but I won't tell you that, but we wrote about that. So physically, he would take the dog, break the dog, separate it. It's called the Solomon, after the Solomon story in the Bible, where Solomon threatened to tear the baby in two. Then he would try to start eating both halves, but then he'd realize that didn't really optimize so much. So he'd separate the dog and the bun from each other, and then he would start to eat the dogless bun and the bunless dog separately because they have such different densities, so it makes more sense to separate them. And he found that the bunless dog, you could kind of just slurp down like a dolphin. You barely need to chew that. And the dogless bun, that was actually harder because it's kind of dense. So what he found is he would soak that while he was slurping down the bunless dog, he would soak the dogless bun in water, squeeze it out, pop it in like a big bun ball, and put that down. And some people thought, wait, why do you want to take in extra water? Because that's filling up your capacity. But actually, that even shortcutted it more, because you're not having to stop to drink like all the others did. So he made it very efficient. He also shook a lot, which he thought forced the food down. And he also worked out like a maniac. He was incredibly physically fit, and he eats very delicately and very healthily. So like that's the one time a year, 5 times a year that he eats crazy. But he's an amazing like technician. Like if you put Kobayashi to work on some other problem, like a medical device problem or whatnot, he would solve it. That's my story.
So that's incredibly valuable. If people didn't get any value of anything else, at least now you know how to win a hot dog competition. Where can people read about the methodology, the philosophy behind it?
I think we wrote about him in Think Like a Freak. I'm pretty sure that's right.
Philosophy?
Sorry?
With the philosophical aspects?
When I say philosophy, I don't mean philosophy, capital P. I mean like methodological, like breaking down how he came to realize that these physical decisions that I just described, why they worked. That's all I mean by that. But yeah. But he also, I'll tell you, his biggest philosophical thing. Sorry, should I just stop talking?
No.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Here's the biggest thing. When I first met him, and he lives in New York now, we're kind of back and forth, and he's a lovely, interesting, really interesting human. When I first met him, I asked him a very typical, naive kind of journalistic question, which was, when you first competed at Coney Island and came here as a rookie and nobody knew you and he was this big, and the existing world record was, I think, 25 and an eighth or 25 and a quarter hot dogs and buns, and he ate 50 that first year. When I said, when you first came, did you really expect that you would set a world record and not only set it, but, break it by that much? And he said, oh, no. I did not pay any allegiance to the existing record. I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, I had concluded that everybody else competing before me was basically trying to solve the wrong problem. They were trying to figure out, how can I eat more hot dogs fast? I was trying to figure out, how can I make one hot dog faster to eat? And so because I thought that I found a better way to think about the problem, therefore had a better solution, I didn't want to put in my mind this number of 25 and an eighth as some kind of barrier, because he believed it was an artificial barrier. And to me, even though hot dog eating is kind of silly and gross, to me that's an incredibly powerful concept if you think about how many artificial barriers we all pay allegiance to all the time. Now, look, some barriers are real. There are physical and financial limitations, et cetera, et cetera. But I think we all pay a little bit too much allegiance to, this is the way it's done because this is the way it's done. You don't. I mean, you're constantly looking for new and ever more interesting ways to do weirder and weirder things, which is awesome. But I think most of us conform too much and don't think about how we can ignore that barrier and get beyond it. If you ever want to convince yourself, let's say you haven't exercised in a long time and you say, okay, I'm going to do something today. I'm going to do push-ups. And if you get down and you tell yourself, I'm going to do 10 push-ups, that's what you tell your mind, then by the time you get to about 8 or 9, you're really tired. If, however, you, the same person, told yourself, I'm going to do 20 push-ups, and 10 never entered your mind, and you get down and start doing push-ups, you won't start getting tired until like 17, 18, 19. Obviously, there's some variance in there, but the mind is easily the strongest body in the human muscle, and we don't take advantage of it. So that's my story.
All right. Well, thanks, Stephen, for joining me with this question of the day reunion.
Thanks for throwing the reunion, James.
Excellent.
It was fun.
Done.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.